You are listening to What the Flood, brought to you by Aon Edge, flood insurance that works for you. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to What the Flood podcasts. I am Lauren Hansch, and today we have two guests on the podcast. Castagna, who is with our InsureMark team and handles commercial flood. And then we also have Tom Little, who has a long list of titles, but for now we're just going to say he is the president of floodproofing.com. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Lauren.
Casey is down in Georgia and Tom is located in New Jersey. How is the weather by you guys? I know it's finally starting to get nice out.
Well, right now it's hot and humid here in New Jersey, but for this Memorial Day weekend, which we're coming up on, it's looking like rain, so not so great for the weekend.
Yeah, I'm bummed about that. We're supposed to have my younger son's fourth birthday party this weekend. It was supposed to be a pool party, so it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Bummer.
Yeah. How about you, Casey? How's everything going down there?
Atlanta is living up to its name.
Nice. So I just wanted to start out with Tom. If you can give us a little bit of history on how you got into the wild world of flood insurance, flood proofing, and all the things.
Oh, everything flood, right?
Yeah.
So I guess my journey into the flood industry started in 2004. I found my way to a company called SmartVent, and it was a young startup business. And I initially came in. I was in charge of developing the sales and the marketing side of the business. We had a product, and it was a great product, but nobody knew about it, right? And so once I started to, dig my hands into the industry, it was like, wow, there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of problems to solve. And quite frankly, it became addicting, right? Because you end up helping property owners, right? And their struggles with premiums on the rise. And then ultimately, if they, God forbid, went through a flood, the devastation and the disruption that causes to their life and their family and financial situation, that when you're able to help somebody like that, you kind of get like addicted to it. So from there, we just started to grow and became very passionate about helping the folks that are in these difficult flood hazard situations, and just started to gather information and knowledge, whatever I personally could grab a hold on. And now 17 years later, still in the industry, and a lot has changed, which is exciting to see.
And which is really great. I think that a lot of times people buy a house, they find out what the flood zone is, but they don't actually know what that means. And then, they're 5 years in, they experience a flood where they were told they would probably never get a flood before, and they don't know what to do next. So it's great that we have companies like you that specialize in that type of thing.
Absolutely. And like I said, our journey started with SmartVent, which is a flood vent, right? And that's
Right.
we have this manufacturing background, and then from there, what happened is we started to learn all about this crazy world of flood insurance and the NFIP, and it was always this mystery, like, how is the NFIP rating a policy? And we learned early on, wow, our flood vents, which, by the way, go into an enclosed area below the base flood elevation, so like a crawl space or a garage. And the whole objective is to equalize pressure so that the foundation wall doesn't collapse or have structural damage. So we learned, wow, within the NFIP world, if you have proper code-compliant flood vents, we could exempt that space from rating, and it would lower your premium. And we spent a good 10 years trying to figure out, well, how can we show a customer return on investment if they put in flood vents into an existing home? And ultimately, what we figured out was it was complicated for, an average agent that's worrying about other property and casualty products. So we just dove right in 2014. We actually opened our own agency to actually rate a policy. So that's kind of, a cool portion of the story of how we ended up doing the mitigation, bridging the gap over to the flood insurance side.
Yeah, it's really great. I know Casey and I are on the road all the time talking to agents, and talking about flood is probably one of their least favorite things to talk about. So I love agencies that really specialize in flood, and it really is helpful to the customer to go to an agent that specializes in flood because the average Main Street agency is a secondary coverage for them. Like you said, they're usually more concerned with property casualty, and while flood is a property coverage technically, nobody really knows that much about it. So I really want to get into the nitty-gritty of what venting even means. And I think one of the biggest snags that people run into when they're writing flood insurance are elevation certificates. And when you get to a couple of the questions on there refer to flood openings, and a lot of people don't know what that means and why do you need an inch per foot. And so, Tom, since you're a expert in that field, I would like to really touch on how what that means for the residential world, and then we'll kind of move on to commercial and talk about that a little bit more. So you mentioned flood venting and how that works in the lowest level of a building, and how does that really relate to your flood insurance?
Okay, so with flood openings, aka flood vents,
Mm-hmm.
as you said, Lauren, on the elevation certificate, which is going to be completed by a licensed surveyor, there's two sections that they have to complete, section A8 and A9, and those pertain to flood vents, right? And to your point, they're going to document the enclosed area square footage, say it's a 1,000 square foot crawl space, right? And then they're going to have to account for, or actually they're sort of doing an inspection, and they're just documenting what they see on site. So they're going to go around and they're going to see if there's any openings, and are they within 12 inches of the adjacent grade, and vents need to be on two different walls. These are all the basic building code and FEMA requirements. And so if I had a 1,000 square foot crawl space, per the rule book, I would need to have at least 1,000 square inches of net free area of flood openings, or if you're using an engineered flood vent, such as a smart vent product line we manufacture, then I would use 1 square foot of that vent coverage for every 1 square foot of enclosed coverage. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so I'll just do some basic math. If I had a 1,000 square foot crawl space, and one of our smart vents, which measures 16 inches wide by 8 inches tall, they cover 200 square feet of enclosed area. So I'm just going to simply do 1,000 divided by 200, tells me I need 5 flood vents to make sure that my crawl space is in compliance with the NFIP requirements, all of the federal, building codes, state and local building codes. So you're going to check all those boxes. And then our particular group will help you, place them in the right positions to make sure you have them in compliance with the rules. But what happens from a flood insurance standpoint, right? So now I put flood vents in this crawl space. Their objective during a flood, as that water rises up around the foundation, that's exerting pressure on the wall, right?
Mm-hmm.
Flood water comes with a lot of force, a lot of weight, right? And a lot of power, which can cause a foundation wall to crack or collapse. So what happens with a smart vent, right? It's shut, and it's got an internal float system in it that latches it closed on a normal day, right? But now we're getting surface flooding. Water rises up around your foundation. The vent is going to be activated when water fills 2 slots on the left and the right. A float internally lifts. That activates. That's the trigger, right, for the flood door to pivot open. And now flood water can flow in, and it's going to flow out another wall where you're going to have a vent. And there's no obstruction to the opening, like an air vent. An air vent's got screens and louvers and grills. That's why they're bad flood vents, because what happens? They trap with debris. So with a smart vent, an ICC certified engineered vent, flips open, you can pass an actual 3-inch diameter sphere through, which is part of the performance requirements, so it doesn't get clogged up. Now we equalize pressure. That's all we're doing this for, is as long as we have equal pressure on each side of the foundation wall, guess what? No damage. So from an NFIP standpoint, that reduction in exposure, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reduction in the likelihood of maybe, wow, the foundation would collapse during a flood, they exempt that lower closed area from rating as long as it's unfinished, right? That's critical. We
Right.
can't have, from a residential, no finished area, no habitable space below the base flood elevation. So we're using this space for parking, storage, or building access. That's
Mm-hmm.
it. Okay. So if you're using the space correctly, you put the flood vents in, Now we're going to move the lowest rated floor from maybe that, I don't know, garage floor, crawl space floor. Maybe it's a full height enclosure. We're going to move it from that top of that bottom floor to our first living floor. Now, hopefully that's at least at BFE +1, +2, and then you can
Right.
start to see your premium decrease from there.
Right, and that's really the best thing. So with Easy Flood, I know we don't ever require elevation certificates, and that's something that our agents really love about us. But we also don't credit for them either. So these flood vents are really important if you want to find some affordable flood insurance. And I think a lot of the confusion comes from with agents. Well, you can get an elevation certificate, but we're not really sure if it's going to help your premium at all or if the premium is going to stay the same. But I think, Tom, that's something your company can help with as well, right? Figuring out how
Right.
much savings they might get.
That's right, and that's a component of it when we're looking at the National Flood Insurance Program.
Hmm.
You hear a lot about the pre-firm structures. Structures built before the flood maps existed in a specific area, and the rates have been on the rise, right, since bigger waters hit the streets.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that, to your point, we get a phone call from a homeowner, they just can't take the increases any longer financially. It just keeps going up. That's the first step, is to get an elevation certificate. You want to use a knowledgeable surveyor. We actually have a locator on our website on smartvent.com where we help you to find a surveyor in your area that knows how to fill out elevation certificates. That's the key thing, right?
Right.
You want to make sure you're using a surveyor that's done them in the past, because the information on there is so critical. It's
Right.
going to provide you the puzzle pieces to reduce your premium. So they get the elevation certificate. What we do, we developed a program called the Flood Risk Evaluator, FRE for short.
Mm-hmm.
And that was developed shortly after Hurricane Sandy devastated the Northeast, because up here in the Northeast, we got hit with Biggert Waters and Sandy right at the same time.
Right.
It was that 1-2 punch. And we're doing community outreaches in like Union Beach.
Yep.
That was ground zero where Sandy hit. And they're not all vacation homes, secondary homes there. There's a lot of primary residents, real blue collar town. And we're in a gymnasium. There's 400 residents coming into this gymnasium, and they just want help. How do I rebuild smarter? And how do I guarantee that my premium goes down? Because here they're displaced from their house, still paying flood insurance, and the flood insurance is going up, right? So we coached them up, getting elevation certificates. And then from there, we said, wow, we're doing this manually. And we ended up developing a really comprehensive process and some software on the back end to build out a complimentary, free of charge report. So if you had an existing home and your premium keeps going up, what a resident would do, they'll send us their elevation certificate, their current flood insurance policy information. We'll analyze it. We do an audit on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we audit it, and then we discover ways they can reduce their premium. So if flood vents are a way they can reduce their premium, the report documents it out, and then we even provide here's your current premium, here's maybe where your premium's going, right, as you're phasing the actuarial rates, and then guess what? Here's your mitigated premium if you put flood vents in. Now we can figure out the ROI. What's that return on investment if I put those vents in? And guess what? If flood vents aren't going to move the needle on the premium, the approach we take is, Mr. or Mrs. Smith, sorry, that's not going to reduce your premium. Will it protect your foundation? Absolutely.
Right.
And that's a good thing too. But here's maybe an avenue to reduce your premium. That could be the private flood insurance, sector. It could be maybe we picked up on an error on the elevation certificate or how it's being underwritten, right? These are all things that pop up. But that's a service that we developed just by helping folks after Sandy. And it's now part of our program nationally.
Do you also deal with insurance agents if they have customers that are experiencing these and they're just not experienced enough to walk the customer through it?
We do. And we've always done that, even before we had an agency. That's always been part of our DNA, is the education, right? A rising sea raises all ships. How many times have we heard it, right? And so we will educate an agent. We will help their homeowner. And ultimately, and we do that even if they're not a customer of ours, right? Now, granted, if we can help with one of our flood protection products, well, guess what? Then we know that we're probably going to be able to sell them flood vents and help them with that, product placement. But no, Lauren, I mean, if an agent had a question, we are thrilled to hop on the phone with them and their homeowner. And ultimately, we've done some general agency type of work,
Right.
where they're like, you know what, it's tough for us to place it. Can I maybe just refer them to you? Absolutely. And we'll end up doing that and taking care of their customer. And then ultimately they look great too, right?
Yeah,
Because we're
of
the flood
course.
insurance experts and they're bringing us to the table. So it is built-in value for their service package.
Yeah. So I'm gonna have one more question about residential, and then we'll move over to commercial, and we'll hear some more from Casey. I know she's patiently waiting to jump in here. So with Risk Rating 2.0 in the news so much lately, talking about how premiums are bound to increase, especially in the lower income areas like Union Beach that you talked about before, the blue collar areas, people who aren't secondary residents to these places and may not be able to afford these increases in flood insurance. What do you see for the future of the real estate market as it pertains to flood mitigation, and what should people be doing now to prepare for that later?
Yeah, that's a hot topic, right? Is
Mhm.
risk rating 2.0 in October, the changes we're going to see with it. And, really what the NFIP is doing with risk rating 2.0, they're underwriting insurance like we all know insurance
Right.
is underwritten every single day. So that's not unusual to the insurance world, but is probably going to shock a lot of folks that have flood insurance.
Mhm.
The movement that's taking place right now, and I always speak to realtor.com, right? And they really stepped up last year with the integration of flood factor
Mhm.
and also the FEMA map data into their platform, which
Right.
is just fantastic for consumer awareness, right? We have special flood hazard area zones. We know what those are. An A means this, a V, I'm a shaded X. We all know that. But to somebody that's maybe not in our industry, that's confusing, right? And so it's really exciting to see that Realtor.com now is alerting a potential buyer, hey, you're looking at this address. On the flood factor, it's a 7 out of 10. Huh. Well, what does that mean? Well,
Yeah.
first off, it means buy flood insurance, right? And we'll preach that. But then you can go from there, and it's like, wow, now I'm more aware that it's not just I'm in or I'm out, right? This factor. So with the movement of flood factor, realtor.com integrating it in, what we're seeing is, and risk rating 2.0, if you've sat in on any sessions with Dave Marstead or Tony from the NFIP that's putting this program out, they keep talking about mitigation is going to be really marketed even on the deck page of your policy, where it's going to say, guess what? You're looking to reduce your premium. Look in the mitigation and these items that can reduce that risk, reduce that premium. So with that all being integrated in, what's soon to come is a flood mitigated home will ultimately appraise higher than a non-mitigated home. Same applies. We're going to talk to Casey in a minute about the commercials. Same's going to apply to, a commercial structure that's integrated in dry floodproofing measures. Guess what? That's going to it's going to appraise higher than the one right next door that has no resiliency measures built in.
Right.
So soon to come, that's where I think we're headed, and not like 10, 15 years from now, like in 1, 2, 3 years. That's the movement that we're kind of in right now.
Yeah. All right, so let's flip it over to commercial, as
Yes.
it pertains to what we can do for commercial buildings to help them mitigate risk as well, because it could be a little bit more complicated than residential. And I'm gonna let you guys kind of take it away because I am not the specialist in the commercial, unfortunately.
Oh, thanks, Lauren. No, Tom, I was really excited to be invited to speak with you today because when Lauren had mentioned that you were going to be a guest on What the Flood, it had me, go to your website and check out a little bit more about what it is that you guys do. And then I learned so much from smartvent.com. And I previously, I didn't know that wet floodproofing was required for all residential dwellings. But then I saw, to your point, we were talking about dry floodproofing for commercial as well. So just for like the average person who may be at the same level I am and maybe not have that mitigation knowledge, like, can you just tell us, like, what is the difference between dry floodproofing and then also wet floodproofing? Just kind of bring it to basics.
Yeah, no, great question. So floodproofing.com, I'll give that as a resource. So SmartVent, we talked all about flood vents, and that's smartvent.com. Floodproofing.com is probably the best resource for any of the listeners. Where, to your point, Casey, the difference between wet and dry floodproofing, you'll be able to see the two different categories on floodproofing.com. And so wet floodproofing is things are going to get wet, right? And so I described how a flood vent works, specifically ours, smart vent, it flips open. Well, water's traveling through that wall into the interior space. So it's going to get wet, right? And in a wet floodproofing type of design, you would include flood vents in your enclosed areas below the BFE. You would want to raise your mechanicals, your AC units, your hot water heater, your furnace, and so forth. You would want to use flood resistant materials, right? Pressure treated lumber and other, stainless steel type of quality of products, because things are going to get wet, right? That's wet floodproofing. And that's where you're elevating in a residential, you're elevating your first living floor up above the, design flood elevation. In dry floodproofing, we're keeping the water out, right? So we're resisting rather than relieving, right? Relieving is what we do with wet. With dry floodproofing, we're resisting. So we're preventing the flood water from coming into a commercial space, like a restaurant, like a hotel lobby. Name the commercial building, right? We're building the foundation of the building in new construction to withstand pressure from the floodwater and a debris impact. Picture a floating log in the floodwater, a telephone pole, right? And then that log traveling at some great velocity and whacking up against the building. Well, guess what? The building can't budge. You can't have any failures, and it's got to be watertight. But now you have all these openings, right? You have your windows, your doors, maybe a glass curtain wall storefront in Manhattan, we'll say, right? Those areas, well, now we have to have a way from preventing the floodwater to get into the building. That's where there's active approaches and then also passive approaches to protect those openings. And we can do an active approach, it would be a deployable system, would be like a panel or a shield or a flood lock system that you would need human power, right, to come out and deploy it. You're bolting it to the side of the building, and that's going to prevent floodwater from coming in. Now you need warning time, you need labor, depending on the height. Some of the panels, it's a 2-person job and they can deploy it. Others, you might need heavy equipment, depending on the heights. That would be kind of like your active category. But then there's this whole cool category, I'll say, which is passive. Now, passive is cool because guess what? It's a set it and forget it. So it's not going to involve any human intervention. Much like flood vents, they'll automatically flip open and do their job. Passive dry flood proofing is going to be in the building, and it's just automatically going to work. An example would be flood-proof window systems, which we've actually helped to develop a line of, and it just hit the market late last year, and it's currently being integrated into a bunch of commercial applications where now you can do that glass storefront like you want, but the window itself is like a regular window from the eye, right? You look right through it. But guess what? The system has been built and tested through, it's being tested right now through FM Global, Factory Mutual, right? And so what happens is now it can hold back up to 10 foot of water and take a log impact, and you don't have to deploy anything. The window itself is floodproof, and that's a form of dry floodproofing. So wet we equalize and we relieve pressure. Dry floodproofing, we resist the water, keep it out.
That's a great explanation. Are you seeing either method being implemented more with new construction or even existing commercial buildings? Do you have commercial property owners who are understanding, hey, we need to implement some sort of flood mitigation, to help protect our business? Because I know the average commercial flood claim is over $100,000. Regardless if they are obtaining their coverage through the NFIP or private flood market, the longer a commercial business is, unable to operate due to the flood damage, the, potential that they're not able to return to work. So what are just some of the trends that you're seeing there?
Right. So business continuity is so important, especially after last year, what we went through, right? With any business, not just small business, but the shutdowns and, it was devastating. So business continuity is critical as things open back up. And, what we've seen is, especially with the commercial side, because I think you hit on it, through the NFIP, you can get a dry floodproofing credit, but it's not easy. It's complicated. Okay. And so there is that element of savings there, but the big driver is keeping the lights on, keeping the business up and running. And so we are seeing a lot of business owners that are being very proactive to say, you know what, I don't think I have the flood protection in place that I need. And so what we'll do is we actually we have a business unit under floodproofing.com. It's called the flood design team. So when those business owners contact us, what we do is essentially a vulnerability study. Okay. We look at their existing structure and we will identify where their openings are. We'll look at the potential flood hazard, right? How much warning time do we have to deploy? Flash flood situations, all those type of factors, we boil it in, and then we'll figure out and we'll go, you know what, business owner, here's 3 options, kind of like a good, better, and best. These are your options to mitigate your risk. And some of those, the building itself is strong enough where we can bolt a panel back to it, or maybe put a floodproof window in. That's great. And that's a pretty, simple installation. And we're seeing that every single day. We'll call that a retrofit, right, into an existing building. Other cases we'll look at and we'll go, wow, the building shell, you know what, it's not strong enough to even hold back 4 foot of water. All right. So what do? Well, you could go out there with thousands of sandbags and do your best to try to build a barrier around it. But in our particular portfolio of products, we have systems that we call perimeter floodproofing systems. You can see them on floodproofing.com under dry floodproofing. But these systems are reusable, unlike sandbags. They're systems that you can roll out and build a flood fence 360 around your building. We have interlocking ones that fill with water. We have a couple different options depending on the site conditions, the height you need, the labor pool that you have. And there's even services that we can line up those business owners where a crew will come in and deploy them before an event, potentially, right? So there is a movement with business owners, and for any of the listeners out there, now's the time to do it, right? I mean, we're entering in the hurricane season.
Yeah.
The rainfall events, storm events. We ran out of names last year with hurricanes, for crying out loud, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
We already had our first one on the way.
There you go.
Hurricane season is even here, so.
Right. And so to your point, Casey, that is a trend that we're seeing. And now that's the existing inventory of homes, and then also businesses like we're talking about, or commercial. When it comes to new construction, we really work closely with the architect and the engineer, anybody part of the design community. The building codes, the FEMA regulate, all those standards exist, and it has to be integrated in if you're building in a special flood hazard area zone, these measures right from Jump Street, or you're not going to get your permit to go ahead and move forward with your project. You're not going to get your CO, right? And so ultimately we'll work with those designers under the same umbrella, the flood design team, and then we'll build these systems into those designs. Now, the movement that we're seeing, passive, right? There's the active approaches work, but again, we don't have, in some cases, great warning time. And if you have a passive approach integrated in, like a floodproof window, or we even have systems that pop up from underneath the ground using floodwater to seal an opening, like in a parking garage, those systems, they just, they're going to work. And it's kind of, you don't need the manpower to be there. And so that's a movement in the design community, is integration of passive approaches to mitigation.
Okay. Yeah, no, this is also fascinating. Like you said earlier, I mean, education is key. And I feel like I've already learned so much just in this 30 minutes. I feel like we could probably talk for hours on it.
I agree.
No, so I really appreciate that. Your insight is fantastic, and I think our listeners are going to get a lot from this, and it allows us to open up the dialogue and conversation with our agents and with our brokers. And I think the more that we can just educate the insurance community, the better we can all serve the insureds.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
for sure. Well, thank you, Tom, for coming on today. I definitely highly recommend going to floodproofing.com and smartventing.com, or smartvent.com rather. Use it as a reference, all you agents out there. There is so much good information on there, and I think you could feel free to call Tom up if you do have any questions about helping your insureds out.
Absolutely. And Lauren and Casey, thank you so much for having us on and having this discussion, and mitigation is, the movement's here. And
Yeah.
so floodproofing.com, like Lauren said, is a great resource. And we even have a cool live chat button on there where you can actually chat with a certified floodplain manager and just fire any questions you have relevant to, flood protection, mitigation, dry versus wet, all of those things. So try that out. It's pretty cool.
Oh, that's great. No commitment, guys. All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Casey, too, for joining today. And have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for listening to What the Flood podcast, brought to you by Aon Edge. For more information about our programs, please visit aonedge.com. For questions, please email us at edgefeedback@aon.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.